This is Creativity Drill with Dr. Don and Jonathan Rundman.
Hey everybody, our guest today is a return engagement. That's right, you've heard earlier in our episodes, David Casimir, lawyer, songwriter, and general thinking person. He appeared earlier in our series of episodes, but today he is returning. The first time we've ever had a guest make a return appearance. And as you listen, you will understand why Dave is worthy of multiple episodes. In fact, he could have his own podcast every single week and not run out of interesting things to say. So we know you will enjoy this particular episode. So thanks for listening. I shall now reintroduce you to the brilliant and insightful David Casimir.
Rolling.
Hey everyone, welcome to Creativity Drill. This is Dawn, and we're doing an episode of Creativity Drill with our good friend Dave Casimir, who we've known for a good long time. And Dave is an intellectual property attorney, in addition to many other things, and is an avid lifelong learner. And the theme of this podcast is thinking creatively and thinking about creative things about the future. So the theme, I have decided,
The future
is the future. And Dave is with us to talk about the future because inevitably when we get a chance to visit with Dave and talk with Dave, the future always comes up in sort of a really fun, interesting, provocative kind of way.
So this is the hobbyist futurist episode.
This is the hobbyist future episode with like creativity sprinkled in, as it inevitably will be. So welcome to the podcast, everyone. Thanks for listening. And here is our guest, Dave. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
And we're good and we're rolling. So one of the things that I feel like you have insight into when it comes to the future is based on your work in intellectual property and all the sort of medical kinds of things that you've seen going on in the patenting world and the intellectual property world. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to some things you see about the future when it comes to medicine, when it comes to health, and kind of themes like that.
Yeah, actually, we're in a really, really exciting time now. So one of the things I get to do with my job, and it's super exciting, is kind of learn about stuff before it becomes public. So I've got a lot of sort of knowledge about what everyone's going to find out about a year or two from now. And I work with a lot of the top medical researchers around the country and the world. And it's been a blast to be able to do that because I really love sort of learning more than anything else. And we're at a unique period in time with medical research where, for decades and decades and decades, the promise has always been there and the delivery's been slow on some of our biggest problems. And we're actually probably legitimately right on the corner of some major, major breakthroughs that'll be life-changing. Cancer being one of the big ones. Mm-hmm. Cancer's been, almost everyone's been affected by it. Someone in their family or friend group has had it or knows someone who has. And it's always been this unbeatable, terrible, terrible disease. And I remember giving a talk. There was an insurance group who had me speak with before them 15, 16 years ago about what's coming down the pike, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I remember giving somewhat of a pessimistic talk. There was all this promise about, hey, we're going to be curing cancer around the corner and Alzheimer's disease and all these terrible things. And I said, we're not close. And I don't know if it's going to be 50 or 100 years or, it'll be sometime, but it may be way off in the future. And I think the great news is it's actually now corners are being turned and we're within years of major breakthroughs.
Instead of decades?
Instead of decades.
Wow.
It's hard to say exactly when these things will time out, but I'm highly optimistic 20 years from now. Cancer will be a chronic disease, not a life taker, a manageable chronic disease. A lot of the Alzheimer's and other sort of autoimmune stuff, a lot of the things we don't really fully understand are going to be treatable, manageable, and maybe eradicated. And it might be 10 years. And I, at no other point in my life would say that, and I think we're actually there.
Do you think part of that is because you have the ability in your job to see, 1 or 2 years ahead of when everyone else does, to see some of the advances, some of the patents, some of the research out there?
I think it's actually not so much that. It's a little bit that, but it's more so that my training as a scientist was in biochemistry. And what I've studied was basically the underlying mechanisms of how all these things work in your body. How do medications work? What are all the different molecules doing in your body? So my scientific training's in the area of appreciating the mechanism of how things work. And when you see the mechanism, you get a better idea for how close are we actually there? Are we sort of speculative guesswork, or are we actually figuring stuff out? And it's just clear now that we've figured out enough stuff that these breakthroughs aren't going to happen. I mean, there's still mystery. There's going to be some disappointments. But, and like I said, I can't guarantee any of this, but if we come back and meet in 20 years, if we're all lucky enough to be here, I would bet money I'm right on this.
You can say, I told you so.
Yeah.
Well, that would be awesome.
It's really exciting. I mean, it's
that would be awesome.
Game-changing stuff's coming around the corner.
Woohoo! It's weird to have an 8-year-old child and an 11-year-old child, and to imagine 20 years, they are still young adults.
Right.
And for them, their young adulthood could be radically different than anyone else's in the history of the universe.
Yeah, and so this has happened before, right? So we're in a world now where you have children, and the expectation is they'll be birth healthy. I mean, obviously that doesn't happen for everyone. That they'll grow to adulthood. That they'll have kids, and you'll get to see your grandkids, and that's sort of the paradigm that everyone works in. We're in this little slice of history where that's been the case.
Yeah.
In the old days, people expected some of their children weren't going to make it.
Yeah.
And if you visit like old cemeteries, right, you'll see it's filled with sort of babies.
Yeah, it's not even that long ago.
Really
it's 100 years ago, or it's recent history.
And things that are treatable, infectious diseases. Terrible killers are now, at least in the first world, eradicated. So we've had these big sort of breaks before where, you didn't necessarily expect that you were going to live to old age in the old days, and now that expectations changed, and it's changed how we think. It's changed our culture in a lot of ways. Life's become more precious. Things that risk taking our lives have become scarier because there's expectation we're going to live longer. Mm-hmm. And so this next generation, if we do in fact beat these things, there's going to be more of those expectations, which kind of creates an interesting twist of the future. Life becomes more precious yet. If everyone's expecting to be healthy until they're 90 or 100 or 110, anything that sort of interrupts that is sort of worse. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be more afraid of it, and we're going to penalize it more.
And all the things that killed a lot of people in the past, we are making conscious choices as a society to move away from, like cigarette smoking and driving a car. Like if you have driverless cars, then there's no drunk driving accident.
Right. Or just careless accidents.
Or falling asleep at the wheel.
Right.
Or texting.
Or texting while driving. So, I mean, the chances of dying in a car in 10 years are going to be way less than they are now. And the chances of... And our health is... So, our health is radically improving our longevity in sort of a biological way.
Yeah.
And technology, apart from our biology, our outside sets of tools are giving us more and more options for longevity and health and safety and, all that stuff. So, yeah, and both of those improvements are happening simultaneously. So it's almost an exponential chance of longevity and safety coming up
if we don't do ourselves in by other mechanisms. I mean, so there's been a steady increase in the average lifespan, but it's plateaued a bit more recently due to sort of lifestyle changes. Obesity is one of the sort of triggering factors of that. So we'll go through sort of flattening and peaking, but the general trend is still up. And I think people are seriously not just speculating, but saying that many people will be healthy into much longer years. The human body, as it's wired now, does have a clock on it. All of our cells sort of start to fail over time, and that might be fixed sometime in the future. That's way, 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 way off, probably, unless we get some sort of alarming, surprising discoveries there. But there is going to be some sort of cap. We'll probably overcome that cap at some point, the way things go, but that's not any time in the near future, to my knowledge. Although, from a pure technology standpoint, there's sort of this talk that this is non-biology. This is coming at it from a computer side. The idea that with computer processor speed increasing, people have calculated that around the year 2040, 2045, somewhere in that time period, the computers will be sophisticated enough that we could basically port our brains into computers and no longer need our bodies. Now, I don't think that's right for a number of reasons, and I can talk about that if you want to. But there's sort of those really out of the box things where, if that happened, then basically everyone can live infinite lives.
I'm going to type the singularity here.
Yeah, that's called
phone.
The singularity,
Right.
exactly.
And well, we have to get into that eventually. Is there talk in the serious science community about global health of the planet and the environment and climate change and pollution and sea levels and all that stuff?
So, I mean, keep in mind my expertise is not in those areas, but I do kind of follow those things a bit. So, I think most people thinking about the future see climate change not as destruction of the universe in the most alarmist way, but as issues that will cause harm that will be hard to deal with. So when you look at what the biggest concerns are, it's population displacements, which can lead to famine, war, things like that. I think most people believe that at sort of the destruction of the Earth standpoint, that's an addressable issue.
Yeah.
But it's those other things that are really serious problems that are the sort of the bigger concern. So I don't think there's a thought that we're going to get ourselves in a spot we can't come back from on that. It's just there's going to be some discomfort along the way.
Maybe if we get a handle on our biology and our own health in that regard, and then if we get a handle on some of the technology we're using in order to live, we'll also be creating tools and processes to heal the environment or be better stewards of our planet in this same time frame that's coming in the next few decades.
Yeah, and keeping in mind, though, we're always at the mercy of the planet from at a certain standpoint. I mean, what we're talking about here are some human-caused changes that make subtle, but changes that accumulate and create some problems. But at any given time, the Earth can give us a little surprise, right? If you look historically, a fissure can open in some continent and spew out gases and smoke and lava for a 100-year period and choke out the sun. I mean, that's happened before. Yeah. Which isn't compatible with like all these people living on it. We don't control that, right? There's a big super volcano under Yellowstone that could blow. And here in Minnesota, at least some of the models I've seen, you're in the foot of ash space. Yeah. And people survive, but anyone west of you is in big trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're always going to be at the mercy of sort of nature.
Is this conversation itself a conversation of luxury for people in America who are college educated, sitting around in Minnesota talking with our computer toys here? Or is this a conversation that's legit for all cultures everywhere in the world, all income levels, all people struggling with poverty, people in other countries who do not have such a American TV show existence as we do here? So
I think that it's a timing issue, that the things we've been talking about, the good stuff, it will be accessible to everyone, but those in positions of power or wealth will get access to it first. Just as you see with sort of any new technology.
Yeah. Do you think, when you think generationally, and I think of how millennials and now the generation coming up after them, which I've heard alternately called homelanders or the plurals.
Ooh, I love the name of our children's generation.
Yes, they haven't settled in on which one that will be, but
homelanders or the plurals.
It's great that they don't get to pick it.
Have you heard those terms, Dave?
I haven't actually.
They're good. I don't know which one I like better. Do you have a preference?
I think I like the plurals. It takes it beyond the United States.
Yeah.
So
that's a big thing that'll definitely be in the future, right? The meshing of everyone.
Yeah. But I think that they're growing up in a culture where it's a major part of their school curricula. It permeates things about, every classroom has recycling, and they talk about environmental impacts, and there's more of an an emphasis on collaborative learning and problem solving and science and technology helping our environment. And I think I'm just wondering if that sort of educational basis means that the millennials and now the next generation, whatever they're called, is going to be more equipped to solve these problems, not just because they're the young up-and-coming scientific generation or designers or whatever, the multidisciplinary approach, but it's just more, they have more cognitive schemas about it.
I mean, one big difference is it'll be on their radar, or they'll believe it exists, which is one of the problems with some of the older generations. That being said, I don't know enough about it to say that the education they're getting is sort of bad on it, but a lot of the stuff I've seen isn't as good as it should be. I mean, recycling is great, but when you look at sort of like the totality of dealing with issues, it's the stuff people do day to day in their homes that they do to contribute is just such a drop in the bucket compared to what the bigger issues are. I mean, if you're not solving them sort of at the industrial and national levels and governmental levels, we can recycle all we want, but it won't make a darn bit of difference if industry is not managed at national levels. So
is there one sort of broad sweeping change that you've read or heard about that they've talked about, having a positive impact? Like, should we just stop eating beef or pork? Or
I mean, that's not going to happen, right?
Paint all the roofs white.
When you look at all of these things in terms of like national policy, so the politics side of this, you have to look at benefits versus harms. And this is a tough one to solve because the harms are, generally speaking, off in the future or not immediate, and the benefits are immediate. And I'm not just talking like, this delicious hamburger, right? This is issues of economics. And bad economics themselves can be risky, right? They can lead to things like wars and other problems like that. So it is a really, really hard balancing act. And then we have this psychological deficit of weighing future harm versus current benefit and trying to do that calculus right. Especially as how we sort of review our business cycles and our government cycles. Everyone's kind of looking for short-term accountability, not long-term. So the systems really aren't set up that well to deal with long-term issues until the problem gets so severe that we have to. And that's kind of been the history of government. We fix things when it's a step or two past when we should have started dealing with it. And I think there's every reason to think that that'll happen here too. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get smart and fix this ahead of time because we can't as a society, just the way people think and operate.
Mm-hmm. Are there futurists that you admire, that you read about? How do you hear about those ideas, and how do you characterize their thinking, their creativity, and how they develop their ideas?
And is this common fodder for discussion in the biotech community?
Oh, totally. It's on the healthcare side, certainly.
Yeah, this is just what everybody's talking about all the time.
Yes.
Wow.
When it drives people's motivation, especially life sciences research is so slow paced. People can spend an entire career working on one small little facet of one small little thing, and it takes incredible patience and energy and commitment to do that. And if you're not having these conversations about what your contribution is going to do, because rarely does one person fix a big problem. It's almost always multiple people all around the country and all around the world working on different aspects of it and then coming together and sort of collectively solving it. If you don't think that the wheel you're spinning is part of a bigger machine that's doing important things, it would be hard to sort of get up and do the work every day.
I wanted to ask about some technology predictions for the future in relation to patents and just the internet and stuff like that. But before we look ahead, I wanted to ask about your own past in Silicon Valley, because it seems like your career had this, you were born at the right time, so that by the time you were a grad student, you randomly ended up in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, during the dot-com boom.
During the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
And like our earlier conversation, we talked about, artists all living in a house and sleeping on the floor together and doing great work because they were just so dedicated, working around the clock and not bathing and eating Chinese food on the floor. And whenever you read about those early days of the dot-com boom, it was always like some rented office with a bunch of 24-year-old geniuses sleeping on the floor and eating takeout food and inventing the internet and stuff.
Yeah,
and you were there.
I was. And the cool thing is that's sort of happening again now. Not just there; it's certainly happening there in great amount. Although there's some criticisms about the culture that's created, but it's happening all around. That became such an iconic time period that it's being replicated. That's happening here in Minneapolis, right?
Yeah.
It's a smaller degree, but it's happening in my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. There's this young, let's get together and be a little entrepreneurial and take a shot at this. Millennials in particular are perfect for this because they care less about stuff.
Yeah.
Right? They don't care so much on average. Obviously person to person varies, but they don't care so much about houses and cars. And when you don't care about those things, it gives you more flexibility to take some sort of job and financial risks early on in your life.
Yeah. Well, when you were there in Mountain View and Palo Alto in the late 90s, were you aware of just how pivotal that time was? Or did it just seem like normal because you were just living life?
Well, no, I mean, I definitely was aware of it, and maybe more keenly than a lot of people out there, because I had come from, humble background in the Midwest, and it was a dramatic thing to see. I was driving around in a rusty pickup truck with no back bumper.
I remember that truck
from Michigan, and getting profiled by the police because of that.
Was that your Christmas tree truck?
Yes, exactly.
And you were at Stanford, just so people know where you were at law school.
Driving right in front and behind me were 24-year-olds in Ferraris. So you couldn't help but notice it.
Yeah. Did it influence your own work style or kind of your sort of ethic of like, I don't know, it's almost like a punk rock approach to science and it's sort of an informality and energy level that was... It sort of, I don't know, it sort of broke down what you'd see as the traditional like suit and tie business world way of operating. It was just like, screw that, we're going to get together with our friends and do real work and have fun and be alive together.
Totally.
Wear a sweatshirt in a meeting.
It influenced me a lot. So just that culture, I have back in the Midwest.
I think you should tell the listeners a little bit about how your law firm runs.
So we have a law firm in Madison, Wisconsin, so a Midwest town, and we wear T-shirts and blue jeans to work, or whatever you want to wear. Mm-hmm. It is totally non-formal. It's form over substance.
Yeah. And you find people are just
substance over form.
And that's not. Is that even surprising anymore? I mean, isn't that becoming kind of almost the normal way to operate?
Yeah.
Think about how Don's office culture in publishing has changed so much.
Not quite in the Midwest. So I think a lot of law firms anywhere are still pretty dressed up, maybe casual Friday.
Right. Yeah. And I would think in the law firms they'd be a little more formal. Whereas if you were like in a web development or a tech thing, those
that's
people are super casual, super chill.
Well, and so the other thing though that more of a way to think about how you run a business and how you run life. Everything out there during that time was kind of that school of innovation and entrepreneurship. And it was in the faculty. So, Silicon Valley kind of started out of Stanford campus. So it was like in the bloodstream at Stanford, and it was in the law school faculty as well. It was just in the air that it didn't seem like a risky thing to think out of the box in terms of how you do anything.
Do you feel like at the time when you were there, it would have been the late 90s?
Yeah.
Right?
Mid to late 90s.
Mid to late 90s. Could you have thought to yourself, if you had sort of time warped ahead to now, is what you're doing now, would that have been any surprise to the late 90s Dave? Like if late 90s Dave could look into the future, would you say, oh yeah, that sounds about right?
Yeah, I would say that sounds about right. Yeah, exactly. I would not have been surprised with where things have gone.
Yeah, that's
including the bubble busting that happened shortly after I left Silicon Valley.
Right.
I feel like the ages that we are, born in 70 and 71, is kind of an interesting demographic. And of course, I suppose everybody who's ever lived felt like they were born at the crossroads of history, because everybody has that sort of ego-driven thing to think that, oh, wow, isn't it amazing the time I've lived in. But I always think about, like, Dawn and I got married in 1992, and 1992 was this massive year in the culture because it was sort of the breakthrough of Nirvana in the music business. It was the election of Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
It was the year that Dawn and I got email and you got email.
Right.
And here's another thing that's amazing about hanging out with you, Dave, is I think you are the first person I ever emailed.
Oh, really?
Yes. Can you think of anyone else we knew with email?
No,
I have very, very clear memories of emailing you, probably on the very first day that I had email.
Ah, interesting.
And of course, my email at the time was Dawn's email because she was in grad school, and I just used your account in those days because we only knew 5 people who had email. But that was in 1992, and so it was such a dividing line between childhood and adulthood for me to like go previously to have been, unmarried sort of person without all this stuff, and then all of a sudden to get married into Clinton and email and the death of hair metal and the omnipresence of Kurt Cobain and
hair metal may be back.
Yeah, it's just so much. That was just such a pivotal cultural time. Of course, 10 years.
The rise of the coffee house. That was another. That sort of started culturally.
Yeah.
When we were
on
the West Coast.
I think other eras, I always do think we're in a major important time, but there is a shift that is kind of unique to our time period that seems like it's going to actually be a game changer. That when we look back, future generations look back in history, they're going to note this as one of the big ones, which is the fast access to unlimited information on any topic.
Yeah,
and it's changing lots of things.
Mm-hmm. And we're in a weird situation because our whole childhood was the old way, the way things were for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
and then the minute we became adults, it was a new world. And so the world changed at the moment of our adulthood, sort of, when we could go to the bar and not, when we were 21 years old, the world changed.
Well, we are in an interesting transition age where sort of the generation above us is sort of more fearful about the changes that are happening. The generation below us is like totally comfortable. And our generation's mixed. We're a fence riding generation where some people are comfortable and some are not.
Yeah, and the people 10 years behind us, when they became adults, they got hit with 9/11.
Right.
Where we enjoyed 10 years of the 90s as adult life in the 90s before 9/11 turned everything upside down.
But 9/11 is an interesting blip. But what's really interesting, and when I think about the future, I tend to be really optimistic, and I don't think it's because I'm wearing optimism glasses. I think the numbers bear it out. We, as we being all the people of the planet, are becoming a more peaceful people. We're warring less. It's in the news a lot, so it's in people's faces. But when you look at overall numbers, and it seems to be a trend, and there's reasons to explain it that make it possible that it's going to be a continuing trend to the point where that might be a thing largely of the past. You're still going to have little sort of civil war-y flare-ups and things like that, but these sort of big multi-country, multi-power bloodbaths may end up being a thing of the past, which would be amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wonder if part of the reason we're more connected and less warlike in general across the globe is because of technology and because of social media. And so I'd like to hear what you or people in your field talking about patenting technology have to say about stuff like Facebook or Google or Amazon or these kind of online companies and experiences that we all depend on so much, that are influencing us so much. And I have a lot of wonderful things actually about life and art and connection. And of course, then then they have their own Pandora's box of challenges as well. What do you think is in store for the future of social networking and online commerce and things like that?
So, the quick access to information and everything, it's inevitable, right? I suppose there's still a few holdouts that think it's just a fad, but I think there's not too many of them left. So, this is like inevitably our future. It'll take a different form. We're not going to be sitting in front of our laptops and viewing these things, right? This is going to be, it'll probably almost certainly be more integrated and almost into our intuitive day-to-day momentary life. The iWatch is sort of the next piece. Mm-hmm. it might be there's various glasses components coming out where you're going to constantly have stuff, but you can imagine not too distant in the future, maybe, I don't know when it'll be, 5, 10, 20 years out, where we're going to have this information in real time just pumped into us from little devices somewhere on our body, in our body.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a game changer as well. And everything will be monitorable and trackable if you care to have it so. Mm-hmm. All of your health status in real time, alarms coming up if there's going to be problems, that shared with other people if you want to, or depending on where you live, maybe not even if you don't want to, it might be shared. So we have to deal with sort of all those sorts of things, but that's a game changer as well, where all of this information will literally be instantaneous on our bodies and available at any given time. And we'll get to know anything we want about our local and distant environment on the fly. Mm-hmm. That changes so much. And I'm kind of optimistic about it. There's going to be bad stuff along the way. I mean, some of the culture that's come out of social media, obviously people have had issues with. Anyone who reads sort of comment chains on anything, especially where anonymity is allowed, but even where it's not, it's kind of turned into a nasty bit of human nature. I don't know if that'll keep going or not, but overall, I think it's all looking positive for those things.
I feel very optimistic myself too, because I like technology. I think it's fun. For me, it's kind of life-giving. If I learn a new trick on my computer, on my phone, or if I have a new device, that to me that makes life fun and interesting, and I feel energized and charged by it. But I know other people are depressed and taxed by the same thing. But I'm like you in that I tend to have a lot of optimism about the future, and even for my own children, I think about their adult life. Of course, I want to help them navigate and how to use technology as a tool and not become used by it.
Although I think the fear of that might be a little overblown, because I know a lot of people, especially with kids in computer games now, are worried that their kids are just spending all their time on the computer. And I think people forget our generation did that too. I mean, we were the first generation with computer stuff, and maybe not everyone had computers, but the number of hours I spent playing computer games as a kid, and in hindsight, I don't see a lot of detriment to that. And I see some positive stuff that came out of that, serious positive stuff that came out of that.
Yeah.
The amount kids are playing now is no different than I played.
Yeah, well, I know for a fact that I watched about 20 times more television than my children do.
Right.
Like if we're talking just screen time, not talking about specific technology or kinds of screens, I had way more screen time than my children have ever had.
They must never know this.
Yeah, and the quality of the stuff we were watching back then was lower because there were less options.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And these days, like Dawn and I can be in control of the screen time of our children, and they can watch cool stuff with no commercials on demand. Imagine that. I mean, where we had to wait for 7 o'clock or 3 o'clock and watch what someone else decided was going to be on at that time with horrible commercials and annoying
that was the
crap.
family activity, right? So there was sort of a balancing of interest. So, Friday night was Dukes of Hazzard and the Hulk.
Exactly.
But then after that was Dallas and Falcon Crest.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to be with the family, you were watching Dallas and Falcon Crest.
Totally. And I watched, and where we lived.
You're saying what is wrong with that?
Maybe nothing.
Where we lived, if you didn't have cable, you only got one network, CBS.
Right.
Which showed those channels. So those are the shows I watched because there was no NBC. There was no ABC. That was all we had. Yeah, but man, I had so much screen time. It was just unbelievable. So I love the freedom of choice we have now to decide if we're going to have screen time, to be in control of what that's going to be, in control of the content, not have to slog through the stupid advertising. And
I think there's less social pressure, and I can see this continuing as well, to sort of everyone be in the same camp. It strikes me, and I may be wrong, but it seems like kids these days have more ability to be different than each other and have that not be a social stigma issue.
Yeah.
So, you can sort of find your own way and find your own stuff you want to do, because we're not limited to television, like one station.
Yeah.
You can find your own little subcultures now that wasn't available when we were younger. That just all seems like good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you were talking earlier about especially the medical information awareness, That brings to mind for me thinking about the future and thinking about privacy.
Yeah.
And will we define privacy differently in the future? Will that mean different things? And are there aspects of privacy that we're very willing to give up if it means better healthcare, if it means better communication? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I actually have been thinking a lot about privacy. My natural gut feeling is privacy good. And we should have the flexibility to have privacy if we want it. But then I think about the future, and I think about the actual issues of privacy, and it seems like a lot of it's undue fear stuff. Like, what are we actually hiding that matters that much? I mean, on the healthcare side, you worry about insurance companies dropping you, but that's an easy artifact of the old days of the way the insurance companies operate. That pre-existing conditions go away as an issue, that becomes not as much of an issue. Mm-hmm. So if people there's fixes to those issues. So when I think about the stuff I worry about for my own personal privacy, there's issues of sort of security, protecting your assets, but outside of that, does it really matter that much? It seems like the younger generation cares less about privacy, mm-hmm. and a bunch of our generation older will, as we maybe get less private, which I do think is inevitable, mm-hmm. Is going to go out screaming and kicking with that. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure it really matters. And this is coming from someone who's got a bias that privacy should be strongly protected and is an important thing. Mm-hmm. So I do think privacy will exist less in the future. I think that is inevitable, no matter what legal structures you try to put around it. But I don't know that it's going to really matter, other than in people's minds.
What's your thoughts on dissemination of digital art, whether it be film, music, books? Dawn here in the publishing industry and me in the music business are often talk about this, and how we have measurable evidence of the decline of value of the intellectual property of creatives.
Yeah.
And how the consumer is just not willing to pay anymore. The big news on the day and week that we're taping this conversation is the Tidal music streaming software that Jay-Z and Beyonce and Alicia Keys and Madonna have came out with this week, which is their fight against Spotify. Yeah. With better audio quality and twice the monthly subscription fee, but with promises to pay the artists, to treat the artists better. And now the question is will the consumers follow Beyonce?
My guess is no.
Yeah, my guess is no
when
as
it comes
well.
down to the bottom line, people, if they can get it for free or very little cost, are going to go for the lower amount.
Right, and that's how it seems to me. But these people have an army of consultants and marketers working for them, spending zillions of dollars trying to figure out if this is worth it. And they decided to put it out there. So either they're delusional or they've got some data that might suggest that somebody might actually go for this service they're providing. And then the whole thing about physical media, do you think it's gone and we should just grow up and grieve and get over it?
Yeah. Well, because the youth culture ultimately determines that, right? And from their perspective, they're going to ask you, what is physical media?
Yeah.
So I do think physical media is gone in the future.
So it's best to man up and grieve and move on.
Yeah. Now, the economics, that's all adjustable with the law and other things like that can control sort of the economics of it and the ability of people to recoup on their intellectual property. The fact that a Spotify is legal in its current form is one little tweak of the law, and it's not. Right? There's.
Do they have enough power though? Because there's so many zillions of dollars wrapped up in that they could prevent anybody from messing with their situation.
Them particularly, not yet, but people with that interest, that may be. It's always going to be different competing power interests. And who's to win? Hard to say. Mm-hmm. But they're just silly little things like you as a musician are familiar with sort of the mechanical royalty.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a legally set number.
Yeah.
That really
it's about 10 cents per manufactured copy per
song. 9 point something cents, and that's been around for a really long time. It has not kept up with inflation. So that's just, Congress tweaks one little thing, and that number changes. So there's, one source of income. I mean, that's just one, but the little tweaks in the law can reallocate the pool of money that does go into music more to the artists. And there's ways that can be done. But, so publishing, it's interesting. And there's been a lot of debate about journalism as well, right? So Newsweek doesn't exist anymore in physical print. It's just online. And that means their numbers have gone down. Well, at least their numbers have gone down of people who sort of read all of that content and read the associated advertisements that generates revenue. Things like that are going to go away, and that means sort of less people get paid well to do good journalism, so the quality of journalism might drop, and a lot of people are debating about that as well. And so I think there are losses along the way and gains along the way. It's hard to guess these things without looking back, because at each stage, so being in sort of the intellectual property field, you get exposed to these things as these new laws come in, and everyone's screamed that it was the end of the world at each major technological development stage, right? Piano rolls came out, and that was going to be the end of the world. Recordable music came out, like tapes, end of the world. Digital copies came out, end of the world. And historically, none of those has been true. Now, this new one is putting some different pressure on, and maybe this does have a different flavor. But every time in the past where it's been the end of the world, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
And in fact, the market tended to grow.
Do you think we are too close to the beginning of the streaming era to have an accurate perception as to just how big of a deal it is or not?
I do. And if you look at a company like Spotify, they're new. They're really new. I don't know that they've turned a profit yet. When you look at their numbers, they're ramping up substantially. So the artists who were getting their checks in the early days were getting these tiny little ridiculous numbers, and you see these anecdotes in the press about that. Well, that's from one company doing this at a smaller scale. When they're at full scale, like if you look at the pool of money they put in the last few months, it's a really big chunk of money. People might end up doing better. Some people won't, right? Because it's based on listens. And if you're an indie artist who might sell a CD and you look at how many times that CD is actually listened to by the person who bought it. It's probably less than your Justin Bieber or like someone who's got 80 gazillion social media, have fans that they can continuously advertise to and remind about their existence. So the CD, you're getting a premium of whatever that is, $10, $15 for one listen, 2 listens, 3 listens maybe, and then it's going onto someone's shelf. So the counter argument is you were sort of getting too much value for your hard media sales compared to what you were doing if we're metering things by how often is your music actually listened to. And so it may readjust that piece of it. People are going to have to make their money on live performance more as musicians. And they're going to get less on the writer and music side unless they're getting a lot of listens. And what that might do is shift music more to getting it to the things people want to listen to,
and I wonder
more frequently.
I wonder too if it will increase the quality of the music that surfaces.
In theory, it could,
because the lame stuff is going to get listened to so infrequently and is going to make so little money that it's not even going to be worth recording anymore, and people won't even bother making those kind of low grade records that nobody cares about. So only the stuff that the cream rises to the top, and the really good stuff is going to get listened to and get airplay and get audiences.
There's a good argument for that.
And then I suppose that's sort of the meritocracy argument. That's a good one, where it's like, well, it just means that the music you hear is going to be higher quality. But man, just think of the speaking from my own perspective as my age and my demographic, to have come up in the music business starting in the early 90s when the physical media ruled the world. I mean, I feel in a lot of ways so lucky that I got to start when I did, because I was able to build the momentum necessary to have a career before that part fell apart.
Oh yeah, breaking in now would be tough, wouldn't it? Unless you're doing a lot of live performances.
But imagine, being a 21-year-old in 2015 and saying, I think I'd like to be a singer-songwriter. And to know that you'll probably never sell a CD, at least to people in your own age group. I mean, I know that my career in many ways was built on CD sales. And I was in it early enough and got to have enough CD sales at the beginning that now I don't need the CD sales as much, and I can do it just based on playing concerts. But boy, to start now.
But is it a shift though too there? I mean, so we're sort of biased on what existed before. Do we run to more of a patron aspect? And I don't sort of mean like wealthy patron pays for an artist, but collective patrons, right?
Like crowdfunding.
Exactly. Because what people are paying for there is the extra perks. And a lot of projects right now, people are paying to get the production costs. And, but you can imagine a future where people build into that the piece of the salary tied to that project that they need for a year. And popular people are going to be able to do those. The buyers get the swag that comes along with that, and part of that is also just feeling like they're contributing to someone they like.
Do you think the marketplace and the listeners are going to be comfortable with being the patrons and will just step up for the artists they believe in because either they like them as human beings or they love the art so much that they'll toss $10 in every year to a Kickstarter campaign? Or
I actually do think that. It
seems, people are doing that fairly comfortably now, and I can imagine if you're a college student in this day and age, you've probably contributed to somebody's crowdfunding campaign in some respect, and maybe that's going to just feel so normal that you choose consciously the artist you believe in and you slip them $10.
Well, and you can imagine technology helping on this too, to having little micro tips, right? Hey, I really, you like this song, you get a little like button, and it's a phone app, 1/10 of a penny or a penny or something goes from one account to another one. And if you're creating good work and you get enough people liking your stuff, those tenths of pennies turn into thousands of dollars.
Isn't that how Reddit works? Like if people like a certain topic to the top of the list. And it'd be interesting if it worked that way, like if you're talking with digital music on your mobile device, like if you could measure if something was a hit by how far it gets voted up the virtual chart, and then it could show up on your mobile device that way.
Yeah, but you could even imagine systems in the future where people aren't willing to pay per song anymore, but they might pay for a service, an annual service. It gives them some extra perks, some extra contact with the people they like, and then their money goes into a pool, and then depending on their likes, which are free, each like they hit is free, it gets allocated across their likes or something like that.
I'm trying to figure out how it's going to look even in my own life, because the most recent project that I made, the Look Up record, which came out just a couple months ago, was crowdfunded, and I couldn't have made that album if not for the Pledge Music campaign. That Pledge Music, woo! Maybe they'll sponsor this episode. But that was a really good service for the artists. That was a great platform to do the campaign, and so I was able to make the album that way. But now that it's out, and I believe so strongly in that album, like I really want to support that particular record for the foreseeable future. At least for the next year, I want to focus on this new record, or maybe 2 years, and get it out to as many human beings as possible. But I can tell I feel different now in my soul and in my artistic body than I have about other records, where I can tell I feel less motivated to make new art, because I feel like the art that I just completed was so precious and took so much work, and I feel it's so lucky that I was able to make it at all, that I'm sort of my soul is kind of exhausted, and I feel like I just want to get behind that record. Whereas in the 90s, I would already be halfway done writing the next album.
Well, so let me spin the previous conversation back to that topic. Because of that, the preciousness of this in this new world environment, do you feel your quality was higher on this one?
Definitely. Yep. I think it was the highest quality thing I've ever made.
So then maybe it makes sense that this gets unique attention for 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, yep. And that's another reason why I want to get behind it so much. And here's what I'm starting to value in my own story as an artist is I feel like I've raised the bar on my own productivity. Whereas when I was starting like 15, 20 years ago, I would have released tons of music and just printed up tons of CDs, even with a bunch of kind of lo-fi weird music that...
With your biochemistry friends.
Yeah, right.
Not that there's an example of that out there.
Yeah, right. You can order that album because I have some right here at the house that you could buy.
Please.
But back in those days, you could afford to do that because people were buying product. And now that people don't buy product like they used to, the stuff that they do buy, in my mind, the value has increased hugely. So I've set my own bar a lot higher. So I don't know. I wonder if that's true for authors and filmmakers. If they feel like, wow, if I have a chance to emerge with new product, it's got to be so freaking good because it has to compete with all these other releases that these days, everybody emerges online with the same accessibility.
Yeah, there's a lot more competition.
Yeah, and so it's got to be, your work has to be great. And so I can tell already, at least this is how it feels to me today, is that I'm going to have, in the future, I don't know when I'll make more music again, but I can predict that in the future I will make less quantity of product, but higher quality.
And maybe that's a good thing.
And maybe that is a good thing. And it's forcing me to be a more stringent editor. And and I wonder if that's true for other artists. If you're listening to this conversation, I hope that this podcast can be a conversation not just with our guests, but with those of you listening too. And if you're an artist, how do you feel about these things? It would be great if you could email us, Rundman@gmail. You can tweet at Creativity Drill or at Jonathan Rundman, at Don Rundman. Or you could like us on Facebook and leave a message. And seriously, if you send us a tweet, email, or message, we'll read it on the air in an upcoming conversation with another artist. Because this is such a pivotal time. It's pretty exciting. It's a little bit freaky. It's a little bit scary. It's kind of mysterious. But at the same time, there's great potential. And imagine if a lot of artists raise the bar on their own work, and all of a sudden independent art gets, if there's more passion behind it and if it's higher quality. I mean, I know for sure I've never been more passionate about a record than this one that I've just made. And I wonder if just the atmosphere that I'm in has made these changes in my own emotions about the art that I'm making.
Well, and there's maybe other things that get sold too, right? So a customer's relationship with an artist is in part the product, but it's not the whole story, right? There's a relationship. When you look at, I think, a lot of the successful crowdfunded campaigns, a lot of it is sort of the patron-esque support of the artist and desire to support the artist, but a lot of it depends on the goodies that are being sold too, right? Someone who's coming in at a $25 price point versus a $50 might entirely be determined by what kind of thing they get for the $50.
Mm-hmm. Or how personally connected they want to be to the artist.
Exactly.
If they can meet that person at their next show in town or whatever.
And so selling some of these additional experiences through crowdfunding is totally a viable thing to add, right? I mean, so people used to bake their total value into the price of a product. And then maybe not even give their customer everything they wanted because that financial relationship was done. This is sort of a different type of relationship where someone might be willing to pay a good bit more upfront or over time to have a more interactive relationship with artists.
Let me ask you, thinking ahead, say 10 years in the future, about the future of independent artists, what would be a best case scenario? What would be a worst case scenario as far as how they make their art and how people experience their art? Their fans or their patrons or the audience.
The worst case is the easy one, right? You can just imagine there's no market there whatsoever. So for those people, they have to have a day job and it becomes something they do on the side. And that's your worst case.
And they lie awake in bed and think, I always wanted to be an artist, but I tried and I can't. I just can't.
But this might be too cold view of it, but if you look at it from sort of a pure business or market standpoint, what are you offering, and what is the actual value of it? If it actually has that value, you should be able to extract that. You might have to be more creative about how you pull that out and how you protect that. But if what you have has value to people, they'll pay for it, and you'll get exactly what that value is.
Yeah.
And maybe that value's been tilted off wrong previously because too few people were producing content. And now we have a lot more, and so we're actually seeing the truer value of stuff. Mm-hmm. But maybe the value's a lot higher than people are thinking, and they just have to rethink about how you package stuff. The music or the arts in general, a lot of artists don't tend to be very business savvy. If they learned about how other businesses operate through paradigm shifts, there's just thousands and thousands of examples in other industries how businesses change to survive these things. I think those lessons are out there. You recreate your world to access the market that exists.
I've been reading about this in marketing. I think it's called a pivot.
Sure.
And I love that idea. And I remember I read a musical example of it about the music business, and they listed famous music artists who pivoted in their midst of their career and really saved their career. And like one example was the Black Eyed Peas, which started out as kind of a hip hop collective, and they did fine and had some successful records. And they realized, no, we want to really blow the roof off. And so they pivoted and became like a pop group that had singing and songs, and
right.
And they kind of gave up on the hip hop thing and became one of the biggest bands in the world for the last 10 years,
yeah.
and had hit after hit after
like
hit.
Super Bowl appearance type
exactly, stuff. Because they made a conscious decision. We want to reach as many people as humanly possible. Or I think about like Darius Rucker, who was in Hootie and the Blowfish in the 90s,
yeah,
right? So he was like
country artist,
right? And he was like, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I sort of know who my audience is, and I know the kind of music that how my voice kind of resonates with certain kinds of sounds and instruments, and who are those people out in the seats. And if the rock band I was in just isn't drawing or doesn't have the reputation it used to have, I mean, that's a pretty radical pivot to sort of give up on your entire radio network, national radio industry that supported you, and to go to a different genre. But they were waiting for him, and they welcomed him with open arms, and now he's like this huge star.
And some people might call that a, quote, sellout.
They might call it a sellout.
But if you're, the idea, if you want to make a living as an artist, you have to sell.
Right. And he might say, what I really did was I came home to my true self, or I recognized where my resonance as an artist was really going to connect. And
well, like if you want to have the noblest heart and never sell out, then you need a day job, and it needs to be a hobby.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Because it's a service business ultimately, right?
Yeah.
You're providing something that theoretically someone wants to pay money for.
Yep.
So you have to give them the thing they're going to pay for. If they're not paying for it, then you're not selling the right thing.
Yep. Well, I'm thinking about that very thing as someone with a new album right now, and trying to identify who the people are who need to hear the album. Because I must admit, when I made this album, I didn't... I guess I was going to say I didn't make it with any commercial consideration. I do have to say that it was a project of my own heart, where I had a very specific vision as an artist that I wanted to pursue, regardless of what was popular in the mainstream. I just knew the kind of noise I wanted to make. But I also did make some commercial decisions about it, meaning one, what had to do with technical quality or technical fidelity.
Right.
And so I decided that I was going to spend extra time and money to make it sound as professional and contemporary and slick as humanly possible. So in that regard, I did make some choices considering the marketplace. But in general, the songs themselves were mostly a heart on your sleeve kind of project, which I think is still legit. But now I have to figure out, I made the product, and now I have to find the audience. And they're out there, but I still want to find more of them.
And that's the business challenge.
And so I wonder, though, the next time I make an album, it would be, I'm wondering if I shouldn't identify the audience first and then make an album for them and do the process in reverse.
I think that works so long as the audience you choose is not one who will view that style
as unacceptable. Yeah, right. But you can, though, identify a community that is in need of a certain kind of artistic voice, Because like the last couple projects I made, Nordic folk music and liturgical music,
Right.
were both highly niche oriented, and both were for a certain community that was hungry for content. Underserved, exactly. And I was passionate about those kinds of genres and those kinds of sounds. And so, and not because I'm some sort of business genius or artistic genius, but I was lucky enough to find an audience that was in need for the kind of music that I was passionate about making at the time. And boy, those were two of the most successful things I've ever done.
Yeah.
And so, and I certainly don't feel like I sold out. I feel like it was that magic moment where
things lined
up. And I do think you can be wise about the art you make before you start cranking it out, to sort of identify who are the people that are hungry for the kind of thing you're passionate about, and to try to, you can help things line up. It doesn't have to just fall out of the sky. I mean, you can have a hand in identifying, an audience for the art you make.
Well, this is one of the big shifts, right? As we've moved from everyone in the music industry working under giant labels, under contract, to a lot of people out on their own. And I think that trend will continue. I mean, the labels will still be out there, obviously. But anyone who's out there on their own is missing something from the big labels. And what that is business.
Yep.
And while a lot of people might not want to do this, independent artists or smaller artists or little indie shops that work with small artists need to become really business savvy.
Yeah.
And the good news is, this is one of the most well understood sciences in the universe, is the world of business and marketing.
Yeah.
Because there's so much money behind it. All this stuff's been figured out. All the knowledge is out there. Most of it free. It's just the time to go learn it. And a lot of people might not want to go learn it, but if you're going to run a business, which is what an indie artist is, you ought to know about business.
Obviously, in the arts, people are going indie more and more and more, and indie people are getting more and more visible and more successful. Do you think all kinds of businesses or entrepreneurship you think the indie spirit is going to start to affect everything that we purchase or participate in?
No.
I don't want an indie doctor.
How about like
Well, you might for some things, though.
How about an indie car? Like if you wanted to buy a new car instead of going to get a Ford or
Tesla's kind of
a
like
Hyundai.
that.
Yeah, Tesla's kind of like that.
Actually, the car's a good example where, because it's such a complicated thing with so many things that need to work together, some things are actually done better by big business. Innovation's not, and big business knows that. But there's a reason these bigger entities exist, and there are efficiencies gained by them. So there are some things that will always stay big.
But then you have Elon Musk and indie space programs.
Yeah, but so everything's indie when it starts from new, right? IBM was indie, Apple was indie. Apple was really indie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know that story well. Exxon was indie at one point in its history, and Ford was indie at one point in its history.
Yeah.
So all big companies are just indie companies that lasted a long time and got big.
Yeah.
I think, though, we were talking about this recently, that the reversal you start seeing of going back to indie is the fact that Coca-Cola, or a big beverage company like that would be kind of flailing now, or just not doing as well. Like, why aren't people drinking as much Coke? And it's like, well, it's because they can buy an independent soda made from ginger root.
And then Coke buys that up if it's successful.
Right.
Yeah.
So but like, as far as the drink, the drink of Coca-Cola, but like people's beverages, they have like the future of beverages. Imagine that conference talk.
Or you could totally summarize it by the numbers dropping for McDonald's and the booming of food trucks.
Yeah.
Up and down downtown Minneapolis, and probably in downtown Madison and in downtown Portland. And so the indie fast food right now is huge.
Well, so one of the big shifts, though, when you look at things like beverages and food, is they're not as indie as people think. So you do have, like, obviously indie, individual restaurants opening up, but a lot of these businesses that look more like indies are actually networks of people sharing some resources to get some of the efficiencies that the bigger companies have. I mean, the reasons the bigger companies succeed is they can produce theoretically an equivalent product at a lower cost and then sell it lower. So if they're doing their marketing right and they've got something that's equal quality and lower price, people are going to buy that. And they do that with these big giant efficiencies, supply chains, getting special deals, things like that. And what a lot of these smaller indie, especially in the food and beverage industries, are doing is they're forming those networks privately together and getting some of these supply chains and being able to keep their costs lower, where they couldn't if they were sort of true indie. And so it's sort of a different form of big business. It's sort of like a distributed big business.
Do you think you're going to have more work as a patent attorney and an intellectual property advocate because the general entrepreneur is going to be so motivated to produce new content on their own?
Yes, the numbers have been rocketing up like crazy. So when I started, in the United States, they number patents starting with, there was a patent number 1, 2, 3, 4. There's actually some pre-number 1 patents, actually quite a few of them, but then they started at some point in the 1800s with 1, 2, 3, 4, and they counted up. When I started in the 90s, we were at the mid 5 millions, which means from 18 whatever to 1996, we had about 5 million patents. This week or next week, I think it might have been this last Tuesday or it's next Tuesday. Patents come out on Tuesdays. We're tipping over number 9 million. So we've almost, in the time I've been working, doubled the number from everything that happened from 18 whatever to 1996. And those curves continue to go up. So everything's rocketing up that way.
Wow. Now you're operating as a advocate for the inventor and the creative person yourself, but do you have something in your own mind that you've invented, or a scheme, or a business, or a product?
He can't tell us.
Well, yes. I have an issued patent under my name.
Yeah, tell us about the stuff that you're creating yourself and your hopes.
That particular one's not very interesting, but...
How about your adventures in equestrian law?
So I did have a little side job into the genre of equestrian drugging cases because of my background as a biochemist.
I always think of you as a horse lawyer.
They need whisperers, they need lawyers, they need all of these things. They're a very demanding beast.
It's a Robert Redford film, The Horse Lawyer.
No, that was a sequel.
Well, can you share even
your patent,
a guess about what you might want to, or even bankroll or produce? Because
your patent is a biotechnology.
It is.
Can you give us just a 20-second summary?
Oh, it's so specific. So, here's the 20-second summary. So, a lot of people know about the molecule DNA in our body, and they oftentimes see pictures of it where it's made up of these. Oftentimes, they're like 4 different colors or 4 different letters. You'll see C, G, U, and A. And so scientists have artificially created some additional letters that you can put into DNA, and there's some really interesting things you can do with that. And I, along with a coworker of mine, had an idea of how to tweak that in a new way. So we have a patent on one of those modified letters, the chemicals that's in DNA, that's chemically modified in a unique way that allows it to do some unique stuff.
What is the letter?
So it's called ISO-G.
ISO-G?
Yeah.
So if you're reading...
And specifically, it's dideoxyisoguanosine.
So guanine is in there?
Yes.
Kind of?
Yes.
Okay. Am I saying that right? Guanine?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Is that your favorite subatomic ingredient?
Is that your favorite of the 4 building blocks in DNA?
I've always been partial to cytosine.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, so that's your patent.
Oh, gosh.
But are you asking what he would like to patent? Or
Yeah,
what he
or
would
do
like to
you ever
see?
have a widget of some kind
Or is
that
there a
you
patent?
could champion, or that would be for the laity to use?
I've had some kind of big, probably not going to work ideas that I'm playing around with.
That
One
you
of them came to me in a dream.
Ooh.
Oh.
So it's floating. You could pursue it maybe in the future.
They're total long shots, so I got to think about them a lot and maybe play around with them to see. I mean, this is like a 1 in 1,000 chance that it actually is worth anything. But hopefully you have 1,000 of those over your life, and one of them pans out. But so there's a couple things I'm exploring right now as ideas. Most of them aren't sort of on the biotechy side. They're sort of more
Gadgets,
internet things that have social good.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're also a songwriter and a film buff and a writer. Do you ever feel like someday, and maybe you'll retire early from your business, and do you ever think about getting into showbiz? Being a producer or
so not
something
showbiz
like
so
that?
much, but I am writing 2 things right now that I expect to publish if they pan out.
Non-fiction?
Fiction.
Fiction. Ooh, tell us about that.
I can't.
But you could talk about the process. Like, you're sitting at a laptop. You're writing. It's a story.
So one of them, I'm writing the basic story on a laptop right now. But the final product's going to be a little bit unique. It's going to be handwritten, and for a reason that's relevant to the story.
Okay. And how close is it to being a work that's completed?
Not close.
Oh, not close.
I mean, the storyline is largely figured out, but I'm early on in the writing.
Are you dedicated to the process? Like you're trying to spend some time each week working on this?
Not that dedicated yet, but I do have a goal of producing and releasing at least a portion of one of the things I'm writing this year.
Wow.
But, it might be like 2 chapters. So I've been fortunate in my life to be economically able to do this without needing to make money on writing.
Right.
So my plan is to release these for free. Open copyright. Anyone can do anything they want with them.
And then what would it be, like an ebook?
Yeah,
maybe?
It'd be an ebook. Well, so the real version, yes, there will be an ebook, electronic version of it. Yes.
Wow.
And it will be it'll probably be a PDF because it's going to be handwritten.
Is it a mystery? You can't tell us.
It is not.
Are there horses in it?
It's not a mystery.
Are there horses in it?
Not yet. If I add one, do I have to have you be a co-author?
Horses were my idea. No, it always
No,
comes
I've got
back
to totally
to
leave horses out so I don't get
the
sued.
horses, equestrian patent law.
One of them does involve a form of elephant.
Oh, a form of elephant. Okay.
Pachyderm law?
So one's a short story. It's got a kind of a sci-fi angle to it. The other one is more of science political thriller.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So if this gets completed, are you just going to kind of casually throw it out there? Or are you going to put some muscle behind it and try to get the masses to read it?
So I'll probably just throw it out there and see if it develops word of mouth.
See if it could be a viral.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be a viral thing. Because if you wanted, you could hire a publicist or you could hire somebody to hustle it for you to the right channels if you really wanted to.
Yeah, I think watching how the universe works, this is probably not going to be the highest quality because this will be my first effort.
Right.
So,
yeah. But that's cool that and you've never done anything like that before.
I mean, I write a lot. Technically, I'm a professional writer in my career, but it's technical writing and something. I mean, there's some creative. It's not fiction.
Oh man,
hopefully it's not fiction.
I'm excited. So when it's done, you have to tell us.
You're going to get to preview it.
Oh, great!
Before it hits the masses.
As soon as it's ready for the masses, too, we'll post it on the Creativity Drill Twitter feed and Facebook page. So those of you listening who are intrigued by this pachyderm law courtroom drama.
It's not quite that.
Set in space.
It's like horses attacking elephants and
with a heart-stopping legal plot twist.
I was going to say there's got to be a twist. There's got to be a twist
some sort of plot twist.
So one of the two, actually both of them have a major twist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so excited about that, Dave. That's awesome. Well, before we wrap up this episode, we need to talk about the singularity.
Okay.
Because it's on my list of things, and I
have a question.
Why don't you ask yours, and let's wrap it up with the singularity.
All right.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Just one quick thing on the singularity. So there was a Johnny Depp movie recently that kind of was flavored in that. I totally had that idea before that movie came out.
I saw that movie. I thought it was actually kind of lousy.
One of my first stories I was writing was kind of like that, and I ended up canning it because of that kind of came out and ruined it.
Oh yeah, well it was because he discovers something, and then he becomes the first person to get where his consciousness gets sucked in.
Yeah, and I was developing a story like that, but now that's been ruined.
Johnny Depp ruined it.
And it's too bad because that movie was kind of a train wreck, but it had good visuals.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Okay, Dawn, you ask yours, and then we're going to talk singularity.
We're thinking about the future. You're allowed to go into the future.
Okay.
30 or 40 years from now.
Okay.
You don't have much time before you have to come back. What are 2 or 3 things you would immediately want to see or know?
So I would want to know where we were geopolitically in terms of are we still warring? So I'd want to read sort of like the big national news and see what the conflicts are. Boy, 3 things. This is tough. I mean, just because of my personal interest in healthcare, I would definitely want to see where we are. So I'd sort of look at some demographic stats in the small amount of time I had there to see what's killing people at that point. The stuff we've been working on now, like, has it actually worked? So I guess I would do that. And then I think I would look at some of the pop culture stuff. I always say pop culture sort of, like, if people want to get a view of what this world's like, they ought to watch, South Park or The Simpsons or something like that, and get a few episodes of that'll really give them a flavor. So I'd watch some content like that from that era to get a finger on the pulse of sort of everything going on through its parody.
So humor.
Oh, specifically
humor
comedy and satire.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. That's true. Isn't it funny that satire as an art form is such a sign of the times throughout history.
Yep.
And you can...
It's even maybe one step ahead of the times.
Yeah. And what an important role that plays. I really want to have a comedian on this show sometime. We haven't yet. I've been hustling a couple of them online and have yet to line one up. But I think that, that's a specific kind of... It's almost like the... I don't know. It's a special
It's a
angle.
lens.
It's a special lens.
I just had an inappropriate thought. I was going to say Bill Cosby's calendar is opening up.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. Bill. Oh, Bill. My gosh. Well, speaking of Bill Cosby, let's talk about the Singularity. Yeah, I'm kind of excited about the Singularity. The first time I ever heard of it, I was at a conference in 1999, and it was who's the futurist that I saw back then? You know who I'm talking about? Anyway, but he was saying, and Kurzweil, I think too, Ray Kurzweil, Mr.
Yep.
Singularity, hasn't he said that his magic date was 2025? Or have they bumped it back?
Like 2040s.
Oh, okay, maybe they bumped it back, because I think in the late 90s, 2025 was the day that they thought, or the prediction for when computers would equal us or surpass us in there, and that we might have artificial intelligence. And
I mean, we do have
like
forms
that.
of artificial intelligence now. Nothing that obviously matches. When I was at Stanford, there was a really interesting talk. Steve Martin came on campus and did a competition against a computer, and the argument was, could computers be funny?
Oh, my gosh.
They basically had a contest with the funniest computer in the world at the time, or whatever, just to see who could be funnier. Steve won.
Did the computer have any slam dunks at all?
No, I mean, like, that humor is one of the last things like computers are going to do well at.
It was totally unfunny. The machine was unfunny. Wow. Well, what's your prediction on that? You think you'd bet that the 40s is
totally wrong?
You think it's even later?
Oh, if ever.
Oh, so you think the Singularity is unlikely?
Well, here's why. Now, as you know, obviously we have this. If you look at sort of technology curves that are exponential, meaning things happen faster than you'd expect if you take a given step forward in time. So you never know. Maybe we get there, but I can't imagine it's 2040. The proponents I've heard of that date are all coming at it from a computer science aspect, and they have this idea that you can map sort of what a neuron does into a computer and have it reproduce what the brain does. Here's where I think that's wrong, and this is me coming at it from a biologist standpoint, and I'm pretty sure I'm right here. We're not a bunch of ones and zeros or on and off brain clicks. We are a really complicated bag of chemicals in terms of who our identities are. Mm-hmm. A computer may have the power of the brain and be able to sort of do the functions of a brain, but it would carry none of our humanity or personality into it. Those are chemical things more, and in really complex ways that interact with the environment. We are not our brains. We are our bodies. And what that means is we're our hormones. We are our symbionts. Many studies in the last few years have indicated that our gut bacteria influence the way we think in some ways. Certainly other animals, like in amazing ways.
Symbionts meaning we're in symbiosis with other creatures to be ourselves.
Yes.
Wow.
Gut bacteria meaning eat more yogurt.
Well, maybe not. You want to, we're just starting to really learn about these guys and their role in our bodies, and whether we're their masters or vice versa.
Have you done any patent work on gut bacteria?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. It's a really hot area right now.
Really?
Oh yeah.
What type of clients, or can you not say?
It's the whole range: university researchers to companies.
Any yogurt companies?
There are food-related things, but a lot of these aren't food-related things. They're recognizing that certain gut bacteria associate with certain disease states if you have too much of them or too little of them, and then trying to adjust that number.
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, it's going to be all over how we handle things in the future.
So gut bacteria, like if you're going to think about the future, you need to think about gut bacteria.
You do, and I don't know how you port those into a computer.
I'm interested in this idea that we are our bodies, because so much of the, self-help lingo out there is, our bodies are just our flesh vessel, and our consciousness is beyond the physical and beyond the body, and the body is is sort of used with degrading language,
right?
And the consciousness is used with elevated language,
right?
And my own position is a more holistic one, where I'm trying to value both and embrace my physicalness and my incarnation of me in the physical world, as well as my conscious mind and all this stuff. But that felt refreshing to me to say, wow, we are our bodies instead of we are our consciousness.
Well,
I like to embrace my body and the physical world.
Yeah, and so this has been clear. So even my own research back in the day. So I when I was a researcher, I studied fat cells, and during that time period, we were just starting to realize the old model was a fat cell was a bag of fat. It was an energy storage for your body, and that's what it did. It became very clear starting in that time period, and then since then, even more dramatically so, fat cells secrete things that are hormones that influence your brain and other parts of your body. So depending on how much fat you have and how the metabolism of those cells, it influences how you think. It influences things like your personality. You said we're just, I forget the exact phrase you used, but we have this basically skin suit.
Mm-hmm.
All these cells in our body are like pumping out little things, and they're interacting in really complex ways. And if you mess with those, you mess with
the person themselves. Yeah, I've been so aware of this in my own life lately because I was telling you earlier today, before the tape was rolling here, before the computer was rolling, that I found out that my thyroid is dead just a few months ago. And because of that, my hormones from my brain have been coursing through my body unregulated, and they've been running free and crazy. And I've felt like super hormonal, and my personality has been different since I discovered this. And then, of course, with the help of my doctor, I understood that, wow, I actually had a chemical thing going on in my body that affected me as a person. My personality, my feelings, my emotions were totally different than they were in the 40 years prior. And it was because I was a slave to these chemicals that were directing me as a person.
And not a slave. You are those chemicals, and they change, so they change who you are.
They changed, and they changed who I was. Oh, yeah. And the other thing I've been thinking about is how that, learning about how that happens to people when they fall in love with each other.
Oh, yeah.
And how what you think is, sort of this, like, emotional connection to another person. And, but you're so at the mercy of your brain flooding you with these hormones and these inhibitors or these rushes of adrenaline and cortisol or whatever.
And they're controlled by the environment. Human interactions with other people, the amount of sunlight you get, the type of light you get, the time of light you get, all these things. So many outside factors also control you. So when you port your brain into a computer in 2040, that's not you or anything remotely resembling you.
Right, because no computer would be able to grasp all these chemical.
Now, in theory, you could, if once we fully understand it, exactly how every molecule works. You can imagine a situation where you can simulate that. You know, your robot body is floating around outside, getting the sunlight, bumping into other robots, falling in love with other robots, getting the right tactile sensations associated with that, and then simulating those things to get the exact same effect. 2040 will not be the year where we figure those things out at that level.
Right.
It is way off in the future, unless there's some shocking things that happen in between now and 2040.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. And I don't know, to me it feels kind of good. There's pros and cons to be so at the mercy of the chemicals in your body and so at the mercy of your glands and your rushing hormones in a way that feels sort of helpless. The negative side is, I'm so not in control of my destiny, and I'm so being pushed around by my biology. But on the other hand, it feels, and like another negative thing might be that the things that we think about as relationships and as sort of true feelings for another human being and are actually just side effects of these rushes of chemicals within us.
And I have a totally different perspective than you on that.
Oh, so what do you think? I
get your perspective on that.
That's me trying to play devil's advocate.
No, but I totally get that. But so for me, I don't see that as I'm under the control of these hormones, or I'm at the mercy of them, or that this thing is just this sort of artificial chemical thing. Growing up in biology and sort of learning these molecules and learning them sort of inside and out and thinking about these things, I totally see that as just me. That's me. Mm-hmm. So it's almost a terminology issue and a state of mind issue.
Yeah.
I'm not at the mercy of the chemicals in my body. I am the chemicals in my body.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's no mercy here.
Yeah. Well, and to me, the positive side of that is it feels kind of beautiful to me too to think of the grand symphony of life that is so that feels so deeply emotionally that's going on within our physical realm, and I don't know, as I get older, I'm starting to value the physical universe and appreciate it for the mystery of it all.
And there's wonder. So I when I think about the moments where I've had these true senses of wonder, there's been some where I've seen some sort of physical things out in nature. The first time you see the Grand Canyon, it's hard to even take it in.
Yeah.
I've had that same moment and that same experience when I've recognized and saw these really complex biological interactions and how they interact in the body to do stuff. I've had moments of wonder like that where my jaw is dropped and I'm like, oh my goodness, pure wonderment.
Yeah.
Our bodies are so complex and there's so many things interacting at the same time, and it's just absolutely amazing.
Creativity.